The early 20th century was a major turning point in American history, a large part of which came from Roosevelt and his policies, most importantly from his
Square Deal.
But before we examine Roosevelt and his success, we must first go back in time. 1898. President McKinley upset farmers during his entire term through bankruptcy and deflation, which negatively impacted farmers on a large scale. As you can see, these farmers became livid. To their surprise and approval, though, McKinley died, and Theodore Roosevelt became the new and improved president. Roosevelt made it here due to his success and popularity. One major event was his dramatic victory at San Juan Hill, where he and his general marched up the San Juan Hill and the Spaniards ran away. Once Teddy became president, he implemented
Square Deal,
which had 3 C's: caring for consumers, corralling corporations, and conserving crucial resources. Big businesses had taken advantage of the boundless capitalism of the Gilded Age. Greed and corruption ran rampant among corporations. Conversely, working-class Americans and consumers had suffered from a wage depression and social upheaval following mass immigration. These citizens, plentiful as they were, would be the beneficiaries of Teddy Roosevelt's protection throughout his entire presidency. Now let's introduce some more key players. These are the coal miners, and this is their boss. The coal miners had demands for higher pay and less hours. They joined together to form a union for a larger effect of their influence. Roosevelt stepped in and helped create an example of his consumer protection with this. After consulting with the newly formed union, Teddy had a heated conversation with the mine leaders. As a result,
Square Deal.
Miners now enjoyed their less hours and more money. Trust busting. Meanwhile, the ICC was trying desperately to tax railroad corporations, but failed because of their lack of any real power. Corporations were happy.
Square Deal.
Until pesky old Teddy revamped the Interstate Commerce Act with the Elkins Act, which placed heavy fines on railroads should they continue enforcing rate discrimination and rebate.
In the Progressive era, the word trust was controversial. Roosevelt believed there was good trusts, which had public conscience, and bad trusts, who only cared about power, did not follow government regulations, and harmed the consumer. An example of a bad trust was the Northern Securities Company. J.P. Morgan and James J. Hill tried to create a monopoly of railroads. Roosevelt attempted to bust that trust. Northern Securities Company appealed to the Supreme Court, which ended up upholding Roosevelt's antitrust suit. Thanks to the
Square Deal,
Roosevelt built his reputation as a trust buster. He busted more than 40 trusts in the course of his term. This cartoon shows how Teddy went from less powerful than the big businesses to much more powerful than them through regulations. Moving along, Roosevelt also cared for the consumer. The meat corporation was also corrupt. One example is this poem. Mary had a little lamb, and when she saw it sicken, she sent it off to Packingtown, and now it's labeled chicken.
Square Deal.
The Jungle by Upton Sinclair also exposed this corruption. This political cartoon shows how Teddy Roosevelt attempted to rake up the meat scandal with regulations.
Along with the food companies, the Pure Food and Drug Act ensured more accurate labeling and less adulterated foods and drugs. This once again placed the power in the government's hands and control over the food industry. Another important aspect of Roosevelt's role was his acknowledgement of the natural resources in the American lifestyle. The typical American did not realize their wastefulness nature with oil, fuel, and water. Roosevelt sought this newfound sense of conservation and changed the day-to-day life of Americans forever. Even by Roosevelt's presidency, the Desert Land Act of 1877 was the first attempt at conservation in which the federal government sold land in return for the requirement of inhabitants to irrigate the land. Also in 1891, the Forest Rescue Act, another attempt at conservation before Roosevelt's time, set aside land for national parks and forests. Finally, the New Lands Act of 1902, not during Roosevelt's presidency, in which implemented the collecting of money from the sale of lands in the West to set aside for irrigation purposes among the United States. In conclusion, Roosevelt aided consumers, corralled the corporations, and controlled the usage of crucial natural resources. His influence spread all throughout the Progressive era until the onset of the First World War, but the Square Deal remained an important aspect in the story of us.